They say humans are the greatest predators on the planet, but what if I told you that for 7 years straight, we were the prey? This is the true story of a single tigress who defied governments, hunters, and soldiers, crossing borders and leaving behind a trail of 436 dead in 2 countries. Based on the records of hunter Jim Corbett, colonial documents, and villagers' testimonies, we will reconstruct one of the most disturbing chapters in the human-animal conflict. You'll see why strategies failed, how the disarmament of villages worsened the problem, and what the tigress's anatomy revealed after her death. Get ready, this will change the way you see the predator and the victim. In the dense valleys of the western Himalayas, something unusual began to happen. What was once just a natural cycle, tigers hunting livestock, turned into an alarming phenomenon. An adult female, later known as the Champawat tigress, made a choice that would forever change the region's history. She began hunting humans. From that moment on, small, rural communities plunged into a routine of fear and constant vigilance. The behavioral change was no accident. After a likely dental injury that prevented her from taking down wild prey, the tigress began to see humans as accessible targets. The pattern of attacks quickly escalated. With extreme precision, she began striking in areas where forest met farmland, places where women and children often fetched water, collected firewood, or herded animals. The human-devouring phenomenon was underway, with reports piling up at an alarming rate. Records show that even before crossing the border into India, the tigress had already killed over 200 people in Nepal alone. The total numbers are staggering: 436 human victims. That figure alone reveals the scale of the problem. A true collapse in the balance between man and nature. Villages began to be abandoned, and panic spread like wildfire. The human-animal conflict stopped being abstract and took on a very real face and teeth. Residents spoke in hushed tones, walked in groups, and avoided the forest even in daylight. With each new attack, the sense of helplessness grew. Terror in the villages spread by word of mouth, at a time when media was almost non-existent. And while colonial India was still trying to make sense of what was happening, the predator was already crossing the border. As the attacks became more frequent and brutal, the Nepali government was forced to act. The victims kept rising, women and children ambushed in broad daylight, often just meters from their homes. The death toll had already surpassed 200 in the country, and there was no sign the attacks would stop. The Champawat tigress always seemed one step ahead. Faced with the growing crisis, troops were sent to support the terrorized villages. Armed and trained, the forces tried setting ambushes and night patrols, but the predator didn't follow predictable patterns. Instead, she slinked through dense forest, observed from a distance, and struck when everyone thought they were safe. Traditional pursuit strategies failed against the adaptive intelligence of an animal that defied the methods of human warfare itself. Even with a military presence, fear persisted. Many families abandoned their homes, creating pockets of internal displacement. The disarmament of villages during British colonialism had left residents even more vulnerable. With no means of self-defense, they could only rely on the troops and prey. The terror in the villages now crossed borders, with rumors about the beast echoing even in India's mountainous regions. Then, on a quiet night, she crossed the invisible line between the 2 countries. Leaving behind a trail of fear in Nepal, she carried with her a dark reputation. And upon stepping onto Indian soil, the cycle of tiger attacks would take on a new dimension, challenging local hunters, troops, and even the British Empire. In India, the attacks didn't just continue, they evolved. The Champawat tigress displayed behaviors that went beyond animal instinct. She observed human routines, mapped trails, recognized schedules, and identified targets with precision. Her preference for women and children as victims revealed not only cruelty, but a logic of minimal risk and maximum efficiency. She was a smart predator acting with an almost military coldness. Villagers reported that the tigress never attacked the same place twice in a row. This method of acting destabilized any attempt at community defense. Local leaders began to believe the beast wasn't just a wild animal. It was an invisible entity that anticipated moves and exploited human flaws. The most alarming aspect was how she moved. After each attack, She would travel up to 20 miles overnight, avoiding any trace or predictable pattern. The forest became her ally, hiding her tracks among damp leaves and abandoned trails. This ability to vanish rendered the hunter's efforts useless, and the sense of helplessness only grew. The human-animal conflict began to resemble an invisible war. With over 7 years of attacks, the tigress's presence had already become part of everyday life for countless communities. Some people avoided leaving their homes for days. Others left offerings at the edge of villages, in a desperate attempt to appease the beast. But what no one knew was that even at that very moment she was already watching them, and choosing her next prey. As the attacks escalated and the death toll surpassed 436 victims, local hunters and British officials began to be called in. The goal was clear: eliminate the threat that had become a symbol of chaos amidst British colonialism. But one thing quickly became evident. This was no ordinary tiger. Conventional strategies failed one after another, leaving a trail of frustration and disbelief among the armed men. In every ambush attempt, the Champawat tigress seemed to anticipate the hunter's moves. She changed her routes, avoided places with recent human activity, and after each attack, vanished completely. It was as if she were studying not only the villagers, but also those who hunted her. The combination of instinct and reasoning made the mission nearly impossible, even for the most experienced. The distance she covered between attacks, up to 20 miles in a single night, was strategic. This movement not only confused trackers, but also gave the tigress access to multiple villages. The result was devastating. Wherever she went, she left bodies, fear, and a silence that echoed through the forest trails. The hunter's failures fueled a living legend that seemed impossible to contain. It became increasingly difficult to keep the communities united. Families fled, crops were abandoned, and even the most respected hunters refused to go on new expeditions. It was in this scene of total despair that a name emerged, until then unknown in the region. Someone who was not just a hunter but a keen observer of the jungle and its complexities. In 1907, the British government and local communities were on the brink of collapse. The tigress had already caused over 436 deaths, spreading terror through the villages in a continuous and ruthless manner. That's when they called Jim Corbett, an experienced hunter, but above all, a deep knower of the forest. Unlike others, Corbett didn't rely solely on his rifle. He listened to the villagers, read tracks, and interpreted the sounds of the jungle. His first encounter with the Champawat tigress nearly ended in tragedy. She surprised him and only didn't kill him because he narrowly dodged the attack. From that moment on, Corbett understood he needed to go beyond brute force. So he mobilized 300 village residents, creating an organized perimeter. It was a collective force with communication networks, trail watchers, and precisely placed traps. For hours, tension gripped the forest. Everyone knew this could be the last chance. The tigress, surrounded, tried to escape through a narrow trail but was surprised by Corbett, who was silently waiting on top of a small rise. A single precise shot was enough to bring the cycle of fear to an end, at least for that village. The body was examined. An old dental injury explained her transition to hunting humans. But not even victory brought complete relief. Corbett, though hailed as a hero, didn't celebrate. He knew there was something deeper behind the tragedy: habitat destruction, human encroachment into the jungle, and the disarmament policies imposed on villages during British colonialism. The real beast perhaps wasn't in the forest, but in the way humans chose to occupy it. After the hunt, Jim Corbett became a legendary figure. But over time, that legend was overtaken by a shadow of deep reflection. In his writings, he revealed that he didn't feel victorious. That tigress, with her 436 victims, was the product of a collapsing system, where human-animal conflict was fueled by human actions. He began to see his hunts as symptoms of a much bigger problem. In books that became reference works, Corbett described the Champawat tigress with respect and sorrow. His guilt didn't come just from the act of killing, but from the belated understanding that the true predator was unchecked human expansion. Seeing forests replaced by crops and railway tracks, Corbett began to question the foundations of British colonialism and its impact on ecosystems. He also pointed the finger at the disarmament of villages, a policy that left entire communities defenseless against predators like the tigress. The ban on weapons, combined with forest destruction, created the perfect scenario for tragedy. It was like taking the walls off a house in the middle of a storm, and then blaming the rain for the flood. Corbett was never the same again. He traded the rifle for the pen, hunting for conservation. He began advocating for the protection of big cats and the creation of nature reserves. The hunter became a guardian, but in his memory, the image of the tigress, not as a monster but as a reflection of a broken system, never stopped roaring silently. The story of the Champawat tigress is not just an account of tiger attacks or the shocking toll of 436 victims. It is, above all, a mirror of what happens when ecosystems are disrupted without balance. As British colonialism expanded between Nepal and India, entire forests were replaced by roads, plantations, and cities, and the animals, driven out of their territories, found shelter and prey increasingly closer to the villages. This imbalance forced deadly encounters. Humans, disarmed and unprepared due to colonial policies, became easy prey. Women and children, the most vulnerable, were frequent targets. The attacks left deep marks not just on bodies but on the collective memory of the villages. The jungle, once distant, was now on the doorstep. The terror in the villages was merely a symptom of something much larger. The tigress's case wasn't isolated. Other predators also migrated toward humanized zones, following a silent pattern across the subcontinent. The extinction of tigers gained momentum even as incidents with big cats increased. It was as if nature and civilization were caught in a tragic dance, each trying to survive the invasion of the other. Corbett's name went down in history, but the tigress's legacy still echoes. Her paw prints have vanished from the forest, but her impact lives on in debates about preservation, human settlement, and respect for natural boundaries. What happens when the Earth's most intelligent predator disregards the rules of its own habitat? Maybe like the tigress, the answer is closer and more dangerous than we imagine. Now tell me, do you think the Champawat tigress was a cruel killer or just a consequence of the world around her? Did she really choose to kill? Or was she pushed into it by human decisions? And more, in a world where forests are still being destroyed every day, how many other tigresses are being created right now, in silence? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Have we learned anything from this story, or are we just repeating it all over again? And if you enjoy real stories like this one, where nature and humanity cross paths in dramatic ways, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There's a lot more coming your way.